School committee is called to order. Please rise and join the committee in the salute to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, and I would ask that you please note that this meeting is being electronically recorded. Before we move on to the one item on our agenda, on our public agenda, I did just want to mention to committee members that I've said over the past few weeks that given the volume of issues that we are aiming to deal with prior to the conclusion of the school year, that I anticipated additional meetings. We're at one of them right now. I think there's virtually no chance of finishing the school year without a couple of more, at least. That is a result of negotiations. It's a result, frankly, of a number of positive things that have happened in the district that have been put on our list of students and faculty members to recognize, which is great, but it just makes the agenda a little bit longer. And so I'm going to be straw polling over the coming days to find out what the best days are to get a quorum, and we'll be scheduling those going forward. Because we've got the additional meetings that are going to be scheduled, and as I've said before, I'll try to concentrate them on the same days where we've already got something going on if possible. Next week's meeting on June 2nd is going to be a particularly special meeting. It is the first day of the Attleboro High School class of 2014 senior week, and our high school administration has put together a roster of students who are representing a variety of success stories in the class of 2014, and those students will be joining us to talk a little bit about their path toward graduation. Many of them have been in the Attleboro schools, both for elementary and middle school, as well as high school. So they'll be talking a little bit about that, and they'll be talking about where they'll be headed subsequent to graduation. So we've done things like that, similar to that in the past, but I'm trying to use this as an opportunity to use this meeting as a forum to really tell the story of the class of 2014 and why that's representative of the stories that are throughout the district. So that's something to mark your calendars for. And I appreciate Mr. Rooney and his staff and Mr. Sawyer and Mr. Sheen as well for putting together that group. And I've seen the names, and it's an impressive group. I heard the names a lot on scholarship night and on awards night. And they really do have some important things to share with the community. So that'll be next week, and that'll be one of the nights where you can really sort of relax and enjoy your time as a school committee member. Tonight may or may not be one of those times. We are taking up an issue of the utmost importance and seriousness. It was reported today, and as the superintendent and I notified the school committee last week, that essentially after months of sort of analyzing the system and seeing how different challenges and problems were coming up, some of them I think you could would qualify as recurring problems or recurring challenges. That coupled with, as the superintendent and I will detail tonight, a very narrow window of opportunity opening up for the district where we felt as though we had the chance to respond to those challenges. All of that has led to the proposal that the superintendent and I will be presenting tonight. So up on the screen, the PowerPoint, which could be in bigger text, I suppose, is reflective of the correspondence that was sent to the school committee and that was referenced in the media today. And these are some of the issues on the business and operational side of the district. And I think you'll note that the superintendent and I, the first sentence in the letter that the school committee received was that the focus of the Attleboro schools is teaching and learning. And the positions that we are talking about tonight and the operational end of the district we don't always see as directly connected to teaching and learning, but I think as the amount of time that has been consumed on the school committee's agenda and in our administrative leadership in recent months, if we don't have the efficient and effective structure on the business and operational side, it becomes a distraction and a disruption to the teaching and learning side. And I think that really is sort of the impetus for this proposal. And Mr. Sheen, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
I just reflect back as I've had conversation with ex-Chairman Tyler and as well as Chairman Murphy and other members of the committee. And I'm going to speak from Mr. Sawyer as well. as well as Marissa McCarthy as the special education director, when we spend numerous hours regarding transportation issues throughout the course of the entire year, budget preparation, facilities operation and concerns, technology infrastructure, pool renovations, et cetera. This all takes away from the major task at hand that we're trying to develop within the community. And that's the whole aspect, as Mr. Murphy said, about teaching and learning. And I can't tell you, in my history of 40 years of being in education, I never anticipated the amount of time away from the aspects of teaching and learning. But they were so important, they were crucial to where we were going within the district. But we needed to fix something with regard to it instead of spending that amount of time.
Yeah, thank you. And so I'll just read through the bullet points really quick. I mean, the sort of ground zero for the difficulties that we've identified are the business manager portfolio. The business manager, Mr. Rose, serves currently as the CFO of the school district. He's responsible for, frankly, a longer list of items that we have time to detail tonight, but principally certainly the budget, responsibility with regard to negotiations and overseeing the relationships between the school district and our major vendors. A few of the things that, frankly, and as I said in the letter, things that have fallen through the cracks, capital improvement issues have not received proper attention by this committee or by the district, frankly, and I think that challenge predates this committee to a large extent. We should not be a school district in which facilities are shut down at any time. Sometimes they get shut down and we have amazing reopenings, and that's nice when that happens. But we should never get to the point where it does. Transportation services, I mean, the amount of time that we've spent in these meetings talking about the challenges facing transportation, there are a lot of reasons for that. Some of them are variables outside of our control, but it's not acceptable, frankly, for an organization that's supposed to be focused on teaching and learning. The faulty budgetary projections that have weakened levels of confidence amongst this committee and our partners in the municipal government, that frankly has applied both at the transportation realm and in our school budget. There was the budget before it was voted on and the request was sent to City Hall on May 19th was presented publicly 6 times. In the first 3 times, there was a significant budgeting error. That can't happen. It's unacceptable, and frankly, I think we haven't faced the amount of criticism that perhaps has been warranted, but we've got to find a way to do a better job with that. Communication lapses have been discussed at this table and between myself and the superintendent many times in recent weeks. And I think the other variable is that we know the fiscal forecast for FY15, and we know it's not good. It's very uncertain what the forecast is in the coming years, but there is not a lot of reason to be confident. And so we have I think our job, it's incumbent on the governing body to identify ways that we can grow and ways that we can change to meet those challenges. And I think that's at the heart of what the superintendent and I are talking about tonight.
I'd just like to add that this all doesn't come down on one superintendent or one business manager or one school committee. We have things that are just coming to a head in 2014. And those things are not looking ahead for infrastructure pieces or such as the pool and the pool renovations and being proactive. We have, in those maintenance pieces, we've had things that should have been going on for the last 10 years with regard to technology infrastructure and so forth that has left unchanged for 10 years that we should have been paying attention to. At the same time, we have the, as we've seen in the last presentation, the school committee having to make choices with regard to what are we doing with a transportation fleet that in fact is beyond its years, that we need to do something with either regard to lease or purchase or whatever. These things should have been done in a 5 or 6 year plan 5 years ago. So we wouldn't be at that point making these type of decisions. They should have been ongoing. And so they all come to a head, one at a time, but then we expect one individual to either stay ahead of it all and still produce all the information necessary to enact a $63 million budget. It's just an impossible task at the time, but these things have come to a head. It's not to blame for anyone who's been elected to this school committee, or maybe even school committees in the past. Bottom line is that we have it, we have to solve it. And quite honestly, we're not going to do it with the present people that we have, in those
the current
positions.
structure, yeah. So just to go through a couple of the challenges, which again, I know were outlined in the correspondence. These are the challenges in trying to meet this. So we've identified what the problems are. What are the challenges that are posing a risk for us with regard to meeting those challenges? First and foremost, obviously, is the financial limitations of the district. We know the situation we're in with regard to the budget. It's not good, and there's no money to be had. Which is why, as was put in the agenda that was posted last week, the proposal the superintendent and I are making is budget neutral. It does not add a single penny to the budget, and it does not use resources that could be used toward other priorities, toward anything other than this restructuring. It's a restructuring that, through the restructuring, we identify savings and we concentrate those savings in the proposal that's being made. The second one, and this is one for anyone who, certainly if you've observed this district or if you've sat on this committee, you know the importance of it, the institutional knowledge and the importance of continuity. It can't be understated how important it is to keep people in place for long enough so that way they know the district, they know the culture, and form those bonds with the community. There's an obligation with this committee and all others to avoid redundancy. We can't have people doing the same job, because again, it goes back to the first point, there's not enough money for that. It also doesn't make any sense, and I don't think it provides for a good workplace. The responsibility to capitalize on all the strengths of all personnel, that's a responsibility that we have and one that we think is incorporated into this proposal. The need to incorporate transportation services. I mean, we have managing the relationships with all the vendors is important. Transportation is a unique one. It's become even more unique perhaps than it was just some years ago, and the challenges are well known. And we've tried to address that as well. It's an ongoing challenge. This is not a cure-all, but we think this is a way to take a big step forward. And then again, just the institutional knowledge. And do you want to expand upon that, Mr. Sheen? Perhaps
I only have one comment, and that is when any system looks at financial deficits, it forces the school committee and superintendent of schools to focus on the concepts of priorities and progression. And this is about what are the priorities and how do we get to where we need to be. And just because we have those financial deficits, we still have to progress as a school system. We have to find a way to get there, and we will find that way.
Yeah. And with regard to the focus goes back. Again, the focus is teaching and learning.
Right.
But it can't be teaching and learning if we're talking about buses all day, or budget deficits for that matter. So now to walk through the 5 parts of the proposal. Again, I know that the committee has heard them, but I think it's important that they be communicated in this forum. The first is a reassignment of responsibilities for the position of business manager. Under state law, every district needs to have a licensed business manager. The portfolio that business manager is assigned is essentially at the discretion of the district. Right now, our business manager is and has for some time, to be specific, since 2003, the business manager has served as the CFO of the district. Prior to that, for a period of time, the title was known as Assistant Superintendent for Business. And it's had a few different variations, and different districts call it different things, but the point is you need to have a business manager. There is no limitation on how many licensed business managers you have, but the committee needs to designate one as the CFO. So I think that's an important point that I know there's been some questions about, but I just wanted to address that and certainly answer any questions about it. The second step is to establish a new position. And I fully recognize that when we talk about establishing a new position, the immediate thought is, well, doesn't that cost money? In almost every instance, the answer to that would be yes. In this instance, the answer is no. Mr. Rose, our current business manager, has agreed to a renegotiated final year of his contract that is reflective of the adjustment in his responsibilities. He will continue to serve as the committee's and administration's liaison to our principal vendors, particularly that's transportation, maintenance, and food services. Transportation is already, frankly, taking up a significant chunk of his time and his staff's time, but with the adjustment in his portfolio, the theory is that the scope will be such that he'll be able to devote the proper degree of attention. Mr. Sheehan has said, since his first weeks here, that the administration's position was that we needed to find a way to incorporate the supervision of transportation into a senior level administrator's portfolio, but that we did not need it to be the sole item in that administrator's portfolio. Even in the budget discussion, we briefly discussed about the prospect of perhaps having an additional assistant principal who would take that on as a liaison for the district. There have been a variety of different suggestions, and this is sort of the current version of it, and one that we think makes sense in the overall scheme of what's being proposed. The other, and I have skipped on to number 2, but I skipped over one important bullet point of that first part. With regard to the reassignment of the responsibilities of the business manager, and this frankly goes to trying to capitalize on all of our personnel's capabilities and strengths and skill sets. We don't have any administrator right now who, as part of his or her portfolio, is to cultivate relationships with external entities and build partnerships for the district. Is that part of the superintendent's portfolio? Yes, as is everything else under the sun. And if you read the job description, it says that the business manager would be a principal representative and would go out, or a liaison, I think, to go out there and try to help build those relationships and foster those partnerships. The superintendent, in addition to overseeing the district, cannot do that 24 hours a day. And the idea that someone, I think it was one conversation, I don't know if it was Mr. Sheen and I were having it, or someone else, that the question was asked, does the business manager take responsibility to try to find ways to bring in funds or supplement the funds through donations or grants or what have you? And the answer was essentially no, but it would be really good if he did. And that's part of the sort of identification of where our needs are. And, Mr. Sheen, if you want to.
Well, the job's a lengthy job to begin with for every administrator in your school district, and teachers as a whole as well. One of the pieces that in the comprehensive assessment was that we really wanted to showcase the Attleboro Public Schools to the entire community. We want to bring our kids back from from the parochial schools and the private schools. We want to stop them from going because we have a great school system and we're building even a better school system. And part of that building of that school community is, in fact, the enhancement of school business partnerships. We have some great school business partnerships as we celebrate when people come up here and they provide us with monetary things. But we want to cultivate school business partnerships that go beyond the monetary piece, that go to the vocational piece, that go to all those other pieces. There's only so much time in the day. We finally now have a position in which that's part of their portfolio, that they can represent myself, represent Mr. Sawyer, represent Marissa and Joan and so forth, and be able to do that in a comprehensive, categorical way by which we reach out and develop those partnerships. And we have great partnerships with the Rotary and the Elks and Lions and all those pieces. We need to establish that even greater. And I think this allows us to do that, to reach out to the community and develop those partnerships.
Well said, thank you. So just to go back to the second part, the establishment of the Director of Finance and Controller, this position would take on the responsibility of being the Chief Financial Officer of the district. This is the person who would be the principal administrative liaison to the budget. This is the person who would work with the city and state governments with regard to capital improvements. And this person would essentially assume a lot of those responsibilities, negotiations, budget, and otherwise, that will have a long-term impact on the quality of the education offered in the Attleboro schools. The third part of it, this proposal contemplates the superintendent's recommendation to appoint our former business manager, Mark Furtado, to serve as the Director of Finance and Controller. I fully expect that this is a part of this proposal that will require significant discussion tonight. It's unusual in terms of the sequence that is played out, but I mentioned earlier that this proposal was born out of a very narrow window of time that was identified, and that is, I'm speaking in direct relation to Mr. Furtado. When we identified the challenges to this proposal, we talked about the importance of institutional knowledge and continuity. Mr. Furtado served the district for 5 years, has served in a similar capacity at the Somerset Berkeley School District for the past 2 years, knows the district, I would say, like the back of his hand. And that is, I think, and certainly it's Mr. Sheehan's appointment, so I'd like him to make those points. But this proposal contemplates having a known entity as a candidate.
It was funny because I did not know Mr. Furtado at all, and consequently, I was in the district in the second week of July, and I heard Mr. Furtado's name mentioned twice. I also heard from people that Mr. Furtado worked with, from City Hall and City Council, from the school district, et cetera, touting his virtues and some of the pieces and strengths that he had. It was very interesting because later on in the fall, I had an opportunity to sit down and talk with Mr. Furtado and get to know him a little bit better with the chairman of the school committee from Somerset at the time. And they spent time in my office for over 2 hours, looking at technology pieces and some of the other things that were, that they were looking to do in Somerset. Later on, I've now had 3 opportunities to interview Mr. Furtado, some formally and some not so formally. And the bottom line is that doing other homework associated with this recommendation about what is the quality of people out there, what is the knowledge of people out there, what is the experience of people out there, and in fact, doing that type of homework, Mr. Furtado comes with a reputation from people who I really need the school system to embrace, and that is the mayor, that is Barry Lacasse, that is Deborah and as the auditor, and members of the city council, et cetera. So I also know of his work in Somerset and the people that, in fact, in Berkeley, and the people that, in fact, that they work for the 2 different school systems, et cetera. And I know of things that took place here in doing the research from people looking at that piece of it, as well as the things that took place in Somerset. And I know the Somerset superintendent very, very well. I hired him as a science teacher at Case Junior High School in 1981. So the bottom line is that doing all of this homework and knowing what the qualities and skills that Mr. Furtado brings to the position, as well as what Mr. Rose brings to our district combined, we in fact, I feel comfortable that we in fact can get this job done, that we in fact are not going to sit here and look at going in front of the city council with McKinney-Vento and some other budgetary concerns and some of these other pieces. And I'm not going to get phone calls from the mayor on a Saturday and Sunday for 2 weekends in a row about some auditing things that took place with the federal government and the food services, et cetera, et cetera. We're not going to be doing some of those things. We need to focus on some of those things, and we now have the time by which to do this. So I'm really, really pleased to be able to recruit, so to speak, quality people. No different than Joan DeAngelis. No different than Karen Pereira, and recruit the very, very best that's going to enhance teaching and learning, because the other things are going to be done that we just take for granted that are done on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, until they aren't done, in which
Until
case.
they're not done, and then they come back to me and you.
That's when they get our attention.
That's right.
And I think Mr. Sheehan spoke very eloquently about the sort of skill sets of the 2 individuals that we've mentioned so far, Mr. Rose and Mr. Furtado. The fourth part of this really speaks to the degree to which this isn't just a personnel move. This is a shift in the way that we look at this end of the district. And that is from asking one person to essentially be wholly responsible for all these different tasks and moving that to a philosophy of a business leadership team that is headed by Mr. Furtado, but includes Mr. Rose and Mr. Parento, who has served quietly but incredibly effectively over the past 12 years or so as the on-site Sodexo representative for the district. Mr. Parento, and I've often tried to have Mr. Parento come before the school committee to be commended, but he somehow always finds a way to miss that meeting when we want to give him a citation or award or whatever. Mr. Parento is both the day-to-day head with regard to maintenance and custodial activities in the district, but he also plays a principal role in our capital improvements projects and the long-term planning for what we're going to do with all these buildings that the school department has custody of. And frankly, given at times the lack of attention that those issues have been given by the school committee, the fact that Mr. Parento and his staff have been as successful as they have been is I don't think that there's anyone that I could, I'm usually not at a loss for words, but Mr. Parento might be someone that qualifies under that. Mr. Sheehan, do you want to?
I've seen two people in my career, and Mr. Parento is either number one or tied for number one. I've never seen anybody better at what he does, and he is certainly a credit to the Sodexo company, in one of which I tried to recruit him to join the Attleboro team as well.
Perhaps one day those efforts
And you never know.
will be restarted, but
But he's that quality.
he absolutely is. And it's the type of work, again, you don't notice until something goes wrong, or we have a major snowstorm and somehow the district gets up and running again in a very short period of time, and it's usually because of Jason Parento. And what I think is really amazing about Mr. Parento is the fact that despite the fact that we haven't paid as much attention to these priorities as we should, he has continued to be committed to this district in a way that we've benefited from. And so how is he affected in this? Not monetarily. Mr. Parento is an employee of Sodexo. Right now, Mr. Parento on-site reports to Mr. Rose, and essentially his role would change in that he would report to Mr. Rose for day-to-day operations, maintenance and custodial, and to Mr. Furtado with regard to his capital improvements responsibilities and planning for the district. And Mr. Parento, Mr. Rose, and Mr. Furtado would work under the fifth component of this proposal with a new subcommittee of the school committee. This is another issue that has been talked about a lot on the back burner. It's been mentioned occasionally at this committee, but our standing subcommittee structure has been in place for decades. Some of it, I think, works quite well. Some of it, I think, is very ambiguous, and I think, frankly, that our current leadership group has done a great job in trying to move those agendas forward, and our administrators as well. But right now, if you look at the agendas for those subcommittees, it generally goes policy. The policy subcommittee will have 2 or 3 items. The curriculum and instruction subcommittee will usually have 2 or 3 items, and then finance, facilities, and procurement has a phone book of agenda items. That does not lead to good governance. It does not lead to good leadership, and frankly, things end up not being given the attention that they are due. And so, as the other part of this, frankly, is as we propose to restructure the administration, the committee has a responsibility, frankly, to adjust our oversight in a way that we make sure that we support our administration and to achieve these objectives that we've identified. So, Mr. Sheehan?
I'd just like to add a couple of pieces to that, and that is putting 3 people together, Tom Rose and Jason Parento and Mark Furtado, in the same space regarding the things that we really need to look ahead towards is very progressive for the school system at this time. And I'll tell you what those things are. When we look at our infrastructure, we need all 3 people. When we look at the MASC, we need those people to look at that grant, to get the money that we can possibly get from the state, as well as other potential grant opportunities. We look at, as this committee has seen before, the capital improvement projects that are out there together. And currently, the newest thing that you're going to see, I believe, in the next week or 2, and that is recommendations coming from the flagship task force that deals with space, which deals with where we are in the school district and where we want to go. This is a formidable team with Mark Furtado being added to it, as well as Jason Parento dealing with short-term and long-term projects within the district. I think it's a great move.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about the learning environment at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And if we don't have the learning environment that our students deserve, then we can't produce the teaching and learning results that we're striving for. So just to run through the benefits as identified by the superintendent, myself, and certainly we're looking forward to taking the committee's questions. We're trying to maximize the skill sets of the personnel involved, create a more sound structure for our financial and operational dimensions of the district, to have no gaps in continuity or institutional knowledge. I can't stress the point enough that there is no impact on the school system's budget, and that the funds being used for this are primarily derived from the restructuring itself. Okay, there's reorganization, particularly in the transportation end. There's the restructuring of Mr. Rose's contract, and then there's a minimal amount of savings identified throughout the remainder of the budget, none of which, if put towards something else, would essentially allow us to achieve any of the objectives that we want. But and just as important, the point of building a more sound structure is so that we can more efficiently and more transparently identify savings so that those funds can be concentrated toward our educational objectives. We shift from it having an individual responsible to having a team led by a highly competent CFO, and also gives us the opportunity to provide the much-needed supervision of our transportation services and to champion the capital improvement objectives that, as those of us who were touring the pool just a couple of months ago know, need to be a priority for this school committee so that they are not challenges that are acting like an albatross around the necks of future school committees. So those are the challenges, the benefits, and the components of the proposal. I did want to run through the policy implications, or frankly lack thereof, of what's being proposed tonight. I suspect committee members have, and I know from some of the questions I've gotten that there's been some questions with regard to what do our policies say about these types of proposals. So there are a variety of them that, if you read them quickly, they seem to apply, but if you read them more thoroughly, I frankly don't think they do. But there are still some issues that I wanted to address with regard to that. The first policy is policy BEDD with regard to rules of order. This essentially, this policy it speaks to positions that are created that have an impact on the existing budget. This entire proposal that the superintendent and I have just outlined contemplates an effective date of July 1st, 2015, under the start of the new fiscal year, and therefore policy BEDD would be inapplicable. Policy BGB is on policy adoption, and if you read that policy, it essentially has to do with referring matters to subcommittees, which I think, frankly, our policy subcommittee might want to look at that as to a way to clarify that, because it's not as clear as it could be. But the important part here is that at the end of the day, the subcommittees are mere subgroups of the school committee, and the school committee is where the authority is vested to make these types of decisions. Policy GCA, but more specifically Exhibit 2, which again, this is why I think we have some work to do with regard to a policy book, because I really wouldn't say that this would qualify as an exhibit. It's really a separate, it really contemplates a separate situation. This has to do with positions that are part of bargaining units. All the positions that we're talking about here are discretionary positions, administrative positions. They are not part of unions. The closest policy to being on point in this instance is policy GCE, which has to do with the posting of vacancies. The name of the policy is the posting of vacancies. It contemplates situations in which there is a vacancy. It frankly is silent with regard to the establishment of new positions for which that contemplate an individual being a candidate at the time of their creation. That is an issue that the forefathers of the school committee could have addressed. They chose not to. I think it may be something that this committee wants to consider, but at the moment, there are no policies that I would suggest are on point. However, if I could just finish, I do think that we do have a policy that authorizes the committee to suspend the policies. It does require a supermajority vote, and there is a stipulation that the matter needs to be reviewed at the next school committee meeting. I'm hesitant to employ that because, as I said, we can't really identify the policy that we would be suspending. However, and perhaps this was intentional on the part of the authors, the policy itself does not require the identification of a policy to suspend, which I think I would infer from that is for moments when a belt and suspenders approach may be preferable to the committee. And I think that given the uniqueness of this situation and the extenuating circumstances, we talked about the narrow window of time. Mr. Sheehan, I thought, made a very articulate argument as to why Mr. Furtado is his choice as a candidate for this position. Mr. Furtado, frankly, has a long-term contract offer available to him from another district, and the window of time for this committee to act is narrow, and that is essentially why the superintendent and I brought this to the committee's attention. So that is the proposal. That is how I would the sort of sequence that I would anticipate the discussion going tonight, and certainly Mr. Sheehan and I are eager to answer the committee's questions. Mrs. Sawyer?
There is a policy, GCF, where it talks about no position would be created without school committee approval. And then in section 3A, it talks about screening committee is recommended when hiring office administrators.
And I would say that the two parts that you've just identified of that policy is, one, the school committee, the position cannot be created without the school committee approval. And that's why if the superintendent had walked in tonight with Mr. Furtado and introduced him as the new director of finance, I would have told that I needed to speak to him in the hallway. And with regard to the screening committees, I think that as a general rule, I think screening committees make a lot of sense. I think they're a very, very sound practice. I think they speak to the importance of inclusiveness and frankly, the vetting that is necessary. But I would suggest, and I would ask Mr. Sheehan to comment as well, that there's no better vetting that you can do for a candidate than employing the individual for 5 years. And Mr. Furtado did not work for this superintendent. He did not work for this school committee, although the majority of school committee members did work with Mr. Furtado. But that it is that attribute in his portfolio that I think that is how the superintendent made the argument to me with regard to his candidacy, and I would anticipate him making a similar argument now.
That's very accurate, Mr. Chair. The bottom line for me is that it's very seldom that you have a person that, in fact, has worked for a district for 5 years, through good times or bad, who has established himself with a reputation with the people that matter most, and that is members of the school committee, members of the administration, as well as the people that we, in fact, need to establish better relationship with, and that is the mayor and the city council and people that work in the mayor's office. And it's very difficult, as I spoke to the president of the Massachusetts Business Association about where are the candidates out there, who are they out there, what are the skill sets out there, and so forth. And the candidate pool is very, very slim. And consequently, to be able to have a person of Mr. Furtado's skill set, but also the institutional knowledge that he brings back and knows about Attleboro and knows about our school system, we are able to hit the road running more so than a person that we would be looking at elsewhere. This is why when, as Mr. Lawson would agree to sitting as the representative of this committee on the Human Resource Pilot Program, that was the Race to the Top program of $500,000 to Attleboro. One of the things that is now new and is really needed within school districts today is the ability to go out and recruit, the ability to go out and hire the very best, the ability to go out and do their homework beforehand, because the pools are shallow for very talented candidates, whether they're teachers, principals, or business managers, or CFOs. And so consequently, I felt very comfortable being able to approach Mr. Furtado, speak to him privately, but also doing some other homework with regard to this district where he came from, but also in the district that he's leaving.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Withers?
Yeah, well, first, before I get to my point, I want to thank Superintendent Sheehan and you as well. I think the presentation that you sent last week and today was very thorough, and for a decision like that, that's important, so thank you. With regards to the decision and the discussions that we're going to have today, I think, in an ideal world, I prefer not to suspend the procedures because, I don't see a need to do so. The way I read, the only provision I really think that could be argued applies is the posting of vacancies. But as you mentioned, the title itself and the language in there says a vacant position. There is no vacancy because there is no position. So, in my mind, it's not an issue. But that being said, if there is a feeling that we need to suspend it, I'd rather, get the policy talk over with sooner rather than later so we can get to the heart of the matter rather than arguing over semantics of the wordings of a couple policies.
That's a fair point. Mr. Storrs?
So, in relation to that, I would assume, and please tell me if I'm incorrect, that we'd be asked to be looking at making this sort of reorganization, whether Mr. Furtado was available or not. Meaning, what's been explained to us is that administratively, this is needed. This reorganization is needed. So this reorganization that we're being asked that's one issue. Mm-hmm. Who fills it is a whole nother issue. I know that the way it's been presented, they're combined, but that's not the case. what is the case from what I'm hearing is administratively, we need to do a reorganization. All right, I see that. I'm along those lines, I'm good. Which means that we're being asked to establish a new position. The moment we establish a new position, there is a vacancy. There's a new position that the school committee has voted to put into place that is not filled. That is a vacancy. Vacancy isn't only somebody's in a position and they leave and now there's a hole. A vacancy is there's a position that is not filled. So that's policy GCE. But at the same time, to be honest, I know that by the rules, when it comes to business manager, ultimately, the position gets presented to the committee by the superintendent through normal process, and then the committee can vote to approve or not approve. So, you know, I also try to look at this under this extreme circumstance with the opportunity that is being discussed. You know, if we went through policy GCE and posted it and went through everything and spent all the money to do that, you know, would a month from now the same name come forward to us? And I don't know if we can say yes or no, but I guess I kind of see value in, if this is really the determination that this is the person that we want, then I see it. But I do believe that the policy GCE applies.
And I would just say that I think that that's a reasonable interpretation. It's not mine. I think that an issue when it comes to policy drafting that is as foreseeable as the establishment of a position that contemplates a candidate who's already in existence, I think that it's so foreseeable that the onus is on the drafters to write a policy that addresses that situation. And in this instance, they haven't. But I agree with Mr. Withers' point that I think that we could expedite that part of it with consideration of policy BGF. Are there any other questions or comments thus far with regard to this stage? Okay, then I think in light of Mr. Withers' comment, and because I agree with it, and again, I think, you know, this is an issue where policies can be read, people can reasonably interpret a policy in a different way. In this instance, I think not just because the policy can be read reasonably in different ways, but also because the circumstances are as unique as they are, and what is being asked of the committee is as significant as it is. I'll offer a motion to implement policy BGF and to operate under suspension of policies for consideration of this proposal.
Second?
Discussion? Okay. We'll have a roll call vote. Ms. Singer?
Yes.
Mr. Tyler?
Yes.
Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Murphy, yes. Mrs. Scales?
Yes.
Mrs. Sawyer?
Yes.
Mr. Withers?
Yes.
Mr. Storrs?
Yes.
Okay, so the motion carries 8-0. We are operating under a suspension of policies, which brings us to the more substantive matter of the proposal, which brings us to this slide. And so, you know, Mr. Sheen and I have outlined, again, essentially a 5-part proposal. We've identified, I hope to the committee's satisfaction, what we see as the challenges or the risks posed by this by this restructuring, and the benefits as we see them, the way in which we've tried to respond to those risks to mitigate them. And I hope we've articulated, we've certainly tried, our rationale behind the different components. So I would just open the floor up. I think ultimately, as we get to consideration of these matters, separate motions would be best. I suspect there may be some members who will vote on different sides, and I don't want to do it in one fell swoop. But I would open the floor up to comments, questions. Mrs. Storrs.
You know, I know we're being told it's budget neutral, and I think I understand how we're getting there. But I think we really need to have a better understanding, specifically get into what changes are being made. I mean, ultimately, by the contractual information that was provided to us, I'm seeing, you know, approximately $100,000 position being replaced with approximately $100,000 position. I see that one as mostly neutral, you know, barring the little things within the contract.
Sure.
Then you have an $80,000 position that's being put in place. So that's where
Sure.
I think we need to focus. Get me to cost neutral on 80,000, please.
Sure, and Mr. Shane, feel free to comment.
Because I'm dealing with contractual concerns as well as confidentiality with regard to individuals, I would prefer that we would do this in executive session.
Yeah, I mean, there are personnel issues involved, and we can certainly touch upon those issues at a later time. I would say that one part that has already been identified in the packets and tonight is the restructuring of the current business manager's contract. That is part of the funding. There are reorganizations going on beneath them that do not affect any of our bargaining units, and that is part of that piece as well. And the remainder, and we're talking in the tens of thousands at that point, are identified again through various savings. And so budget neutral is that there will be no request for an added appropriation of any kind. We don't have to seek more funds in any way. And because of the reorganization and the amount that pays for, there is not a concentration of funds that would be identified to go toward X or Y that would instead be used for this. And so, again, there are some personnel issues that are of a more sensitive nature, but does that at least...
I believe, if I could summarize, and if you could just tell me if it's between the way we'll get to that 80,000, give or take, which probably doesn't include benefits, but it's between personnel changes that we can't get into and other savings from other positional budget lines.
And the restructuring of the business manager's contract.
Right, which is the salary I had indicated.
There are some other
Yeah.
personnel products.
Okay.
Mr. Withers?
And I think with the business manager's restructuring of his contract and personnel restructuring that will take place, it's my understanding that gets us, over 50% of the way there, over $50,000 towards the $85,000 job position or $80,000 job position, correct?
Correct. And the other thing I would say, and I think this is an extremely important point, because what we're talking about is a new business and financial leadership team. Believe me, the first responsibility on their desk is to identify greater savings in a more efficient and transparent manner. That will, I think it is our hope, far outweigh the funds that we're talking, the numbers that we're talking about here. Again, there is no impact aside from the restructuring, really. That's readily identifiable, certainly. But the upside, we hope, is significantly greater than either of these two positions or any other positions that are affected. Mr. Tyler.
Just a quick comment, and I do want to thank you, Mr. Chair, and Superintendent Sheehan, for putting this packet together. I think it's very thorough. I believe what Jim's saying. I think the committee does have a right after, when all's said and done, that we know exactly where the dollars came from. But I have to add that, and I know Dave, you touched upon it briefly, but I don't think this should be a reflection of any way of anybody in the district. This is a big problem. It's been a problem for a long time. This is a long time coming. Transportation has always been a pain, and it's just gotten to the point where there's no way that one person can handle all these responsibilities. When you're trying to do transportation, the budget, being the point person for 7 bargaining units, that's how things fall through the crack. And I do like Mr. Potato actually being nominated by the superintendent for this, because I do feel that we have lost so much institutional knowledge in this district over the last 5 or 6 years. That I've said it time and time again, it's scary. It's how things happen, because people do jobs that other people don't even know that exactly everything they do. They do it because that's what they do every day, every week, every month. It's not really on a to-do list, but that's what they do. And all of a sudden, when somebody else comes in, oh, I didn't know they did that. And so that gets scary for a district of this size. And again, I mean, I think this is well put together. I think it was due a long time ago. I think, as Dave said, we need to be, as a committee, we need to be notified after what this structure is going to look like, exactly where the duties are going to fall, where the potential savings that we're going to see. So it's something we can evaluate and adjust as a school committee and administration together to make sure that if we're making an important move like this, it is the right move. And we're going to utilize the full benefits of it that we're expecting from it. So. Again, I thank you both for putting a great proposals together. I think it's very thorough. Appreciate it.
Mr. Larson?
In reviewing what we received last week, and I also appreciate what must have gone into putting it all together, so thank you all for that. I put some notes together, and I'm gonna just share them with you. I put them down so I wouldn't forget them, but for any organization to move forward, the organization has a responsibility to continually review itself. And as part of that review, the organization will identify its strengths and the areas for improvement. It's the organization's responsibility to address these opportunities and take the appropriate action. We have our issues. That's not a question. They've been well chronicled. What we're discussing tonight is how we can improve ourselves. I believe the plan that's in front of us, it's presented tonight, will strengthen our district and help us prevent similar issues in the future. I think we need to implement this plan. We need to support it. We need to review it and monitor it for the desired outcomes. It's our job, long and short of it. Now, there's going to be critics of this plan. I'm sure we've already heard from people outside. I'm not sure why, but people are going to do what they want, and that's their choice. But the residents of Attleboro and the people throughout the system are expecting us to do our job and to take the appropriate steps to move the system forward. And I believe this plan does just that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Larson. Mrs. Sawyer?
Mr. Tyler, I believe that transportation is always going to be an issue, no matter how much we try to realize it's not going to be, only because you can't deal with homelessness and displaced families at any rate. You know, fires are going to happen, people are going to lose their homes, no matter how hard we try, we can't realize the problem of that issue. And it's a sad issue, but it's just gonna happen. And that's no fault of Tom or anybody's. It's a fact that's gonna happen. And one thing that I wanted to ask is that as part of the responsibilities of the business manager, in here it said the implementation of the Aspen programs, Tom, the business manager would be part of that. Did we not hire a Aspen person in charge of the Aspen program?
Yeah, Ms.
Yes, we did.
Pereira,
Karen Pereira is the Aspen project manager.
So Tom would be working with her, or the new business manager would be working with that
In-
person?
Probably both in certain aspects of that
Would be
position.
doing both?
Both Mr. Furtado and Mr.
Oh, Mr.
Rose
Furtado.
would both be dealing with Karen Pereira in certain aspects of their job that
Okay.
deals with the Aspen projects, 21 different platforms to be exact.
yeah, I mean, I think the only thing I would say about that is the implementation of Aspen is so complex that you can't talk about what transportation will look like in the 14-15 school year without mentioning that has to be as the person's overseeing transportation, both at a direct level, which would be Mr. Rose, and at a higher level, Mr. Furtado. They have to work closely with Ms. Pereira and Ms. DeAngelis, for that matter, to make sure that that system is implemented so that the district uses it to its full capacity. Partly for the reasons that you were saying, frankly, Mrs. Sawyer, that some of these issues we can't amend a policy to fix homelessness. I think if we could, we would. But what we can do is how do we, from an administrative standpoint, respond to those realities and try to do so in the most efficient manner, so that way the students directly affected and the students of the district as a whole, get what they need.
If I may, just to address Mrs. Sawyer, and she's right on the money. I mean, the fact of the matter is that we're going to have homelessness, unfortunately. The fact of the matter is we're going to have alternative special education transportation. Those are facts. But preparation to be proactive and not reactive becomes the optimum. So I would prefer to have our ducks in a row, being able to be proactive, knowing these facts, and not reactive, and then sitting in front of city council saying we need another $75,000 in order to make it to the month of June. I think we can do that now, because we're going to put some pieces in place that, with your support, that we're going to get to that point. So we're going to be in a far better place. And as Mr. Lawson's, the accountability piece, the responsibility piece, that all falls on this administration. And with the help of you and your support, we will make sure that those pieces, in fact, are accountable for. But I'm looking for you to add a very important piece to this administrative team. No different than you have done before and other committee members prior to you with the addition of the Director of Student Services, which has paid its weight in gold. And you don't see the amount of what Karen Pereira has done as the Aspen Project Manager, and just the one piece that she adds to the transportation alone is critical. So those are pieces that, in fact, have made your school system a lot better and more efficient than what you can ever imagine.
Mrs. Scales?
I just had a quick question. Underneath the business manager, where it says it helps manage grants and grant research, is that in addition to what Susan Levine does, or alongside what she does?
It's both the coordinating and playing the money piece of that, but also, we need someone to start doing some research with regard to grants that are out there. I think money is falling through our fingers on a day-to-day basis. And if you're playing with transportation or pools or anything else, you're not getting to that money.
That's great.
And-
That's exactly what I was looking for, because
Yeah.
I've said that right along, that we need-
Absolutely.
there's only so much money out there, and we need to start looking, so that's great.
Yeah, and I would just, I mean, I hope that's the case. I don't know that's the case. I would say that our issue right now is not, I don't know if money's falling through our fingertips now. Right now, we're not looking, because we don't have anybody to spend the time doing that at the rate that we could.
When I see, Mr. Chair, when I see information that comes through emails and so forth from the State Department of Ed or federal government or whatever, and they deal with grants and so forth,
Yep.
and I go to look at different people and so forth, I don't have a go-to person in this
Exactly.
district.
And that's the problem.
I now have a go-to person and can help train. When we have training opportunities for people to learn how to write grants effectively, and we don't have someone to send,
It's
then
a
we're remiss.
deficiency. It's a real deficiency.
Now I have someone to be able to send, and maybe two people to
Yep.
do that.
Yep. Mrs. Storrs?
You know, two points. The first point is, you know, this was given to us, the committee members, Thursday. I found that a little concerning. I mean, this is a lot. This really is, we're being asked to do a lot. You know, just the concept of the reorganization is enough for this committee to, you know, need time to vet this properly. Normally, I would say that something like this should be coming up through the subcommittees. It should have gone to finance, you know, to determine if this is really necessary, which I believe it is. But just time alone, I mean, we were given effectively 4 days during a holiday weekend, mind you, to try to go through all this. And I'll be honest, I even tried to contact people from a candidate's district. I haven't had the ability to contact those people. I haven't received the calls back. But we're being expected to make a decision on this. And I understand time is a problem here. But I think that just shows that if this concept had been out there longer than Thursday, which I believe it is, we should have been at least made aware of this concept before that. It should have come up through the subcommittees, maybe through policy, maybe through finance, so that we would have had the time to at least, maybe not specifically on the candidates, but on the concept, been able to vet it, been able to really look into it a lot more. I think we're being asked to do a lot on a very short notice here.
Can I just respond to that briefly? I mean, I think you're right. I think it's a fair concern. I think it's a very legitimate concern. I think that if it weren't for the unique and extenuating circumstances, it would warrant significant criticism of myself and the superintendent. But in light of the circumstances that we were dealt, most of which the superintendent and I had no control over, I think we represented the committee and the district to the best of our ability. But I understand the frustration. It is a lot. This is a significant request that will have a major impact. And I fully appreciate your concerns. The only thing I would add to that is that while the proposal came about in a short period of time, which is related to the narrow window that I mentioned, the challenges have been growing for a very long time. And that was, I think, part of why the superintendent and I felt comfortable. And I went, comfortable might be a bit of a stretch. We went back and forth about, essentially, is the committee prepared, for this significant proposal to be made on such short notice? And that we went back and forth on that a little bit, but in light of how long we've been dealing with some of the issues and the way they've been growing, and frankly, the pace at which they've been growing, and our concern over what type of calamity could be contemplated in the months ahead if we didn't act, that's what motivated. But your point is very well taken. Mrs. Scales? Oh, I'm sorry, that's right hand. Mr. Withers, then Mrs. Sawyer. I knew it was on my right side.
I was just going to, I mean, I disagree with you on that, Mr. Stewart, just because I think that this is such a unique situation, and it's also a situation with potentially dire consequences. And also, it's problems that we've been discussing ad nauseum over the past 3 months. This isn't, the identity of the person is new. Maybe this actual structure of hiring a quote-unquote CFO and restructuring our business manager's responsibilities the specifics are new. But these are issues we've been talking about, and it's a candidate with a relatively small window is available to us, which frankly for me is part of what makes this plan feasible, because you're getting a CFO with the institutional knowledge where there's going to be no learning curve. We had 4 or 5 days. I mean, that's more than we're required to get for something like this. I think sometimes this is going to happen, and I think that the reasons have been well laid out. Personally,
Thank you, Mrs. Sawyer.
I have to agree with Mr. Storrs, because the first document in here was signed the day after our school committee meeting on the 19th. And if this was an ongoing issue, this is the first time I've heard of it, and yet the paperwork was delivered, like he said, on the Thursday right before a holiday weekend. And we were, with families or people possibly leaving town for the holiday weekend, we were expected to review and go over all the paperwork and then arrive here for the meeting. Luckily, I was in town and I had all my paperwork read and questions ready to go, but I felt that if it was such a dire need, that at some point it would have been addressed either in an executive session or something amongst all of us. And yet, I was never privy to any information.
Okay, I just would say, the holiday weekend was a coincidence. I would have rather not deal with it over the holiday weekend, too. The narrow window of time, frankly, it came together in a matter of days. And with regard to the level of confidentiality, it's a consequence of the personnel issues involved. And I think this committee knows that I put a pretty high priority on communicating with the committee. I would imagine some of you may think I communicate just about enough, perhaps more than you'd prefer. I try to keep the committee informed as best as I possibly can. There are situations when either myself or the superintendent has to make a judgment call with regard to when information is shared, and this was one of those times. Ms. Singer?
I would just like to say, although putting the specifics of individuals that may or may not be appointed to these positions, when we all started together, 6 months ago, we decided that we were going to change the direction and the foundation that this district was going to take.
Mm-hmm.
And again, while specifics may not have been discussed at that point, these are the things that we're going to have to do in order to succeed in what we're trying to accomplish. So while I appreciate, it was a very short time period and that's unfortunate, but this concept, we have talked about these things and how we need to best set our district to move forward. And I think that, I appreciate all the hard work that, the superintendent and Mr. Chairman put into this. And while timing wasn't great, I don't believe that these are new concepts in theory that we're trying to accomplish.
Mrs.
And
Tyler, I'm
very
sorry.
needed.
sir.
No, it's just, and very needed. The subcommittee itself is much needed in order to keep our
Sounds like you want an
facilities
appointment.
and, huh?
Sounds like you want an
No, I do not, I put
Looking
that on
for
the
more
record.
work, I guess, is what
I
it
do not
is.
want another committee. No, but it is definitely needed, so, sorry, go ahead.
Mr. Tyler, then Mr. Storrs.
I can agree with Mr. Stewart and Ms. Sawyer too. It's a huge change, and you'd probably like to have more time, but I think I only got 2 words to say to that. It's superintendent's recommendation. Mr. Sheen was brought here to Attleboro to come up with innovative ideas and suggestions to bring to the school committee of how to make this a more forward-thinking school district, and utilizing the comprehensive assessment that was given to him at the beginning of the year. So like anything else, this position, no matter if we had more time or less time, the recommendation is going to come from the superintendent. So we do what we're supposed to do, we hold the superintendent accountable for all recommendations brought to our governing body. If it doesn't pan out and something goes wrong, I'm gonna be knocking on Ken's door. I'm not going to be asking for another school committee meeting. You know, I wanna find out what went wrong. So again, that's why I agree with this plan. It's superintendent's recommendation, and I hope everything's gonna work out fine in this, and I believe it is, but again, in the end, it doesn't matter how long we had to look at it, and it doesn't matter if we had screening committees. We've had screening committees before where we walked into a room, Mr. Larson was part of that committee with me. We walked into a room with, I believe, 11 people on the screening committee, and we left 5 minutes later. With a unanimous, not unanimous, I'm sorry, there's one vote out of that, to keep that person that was already doing it in place. So sometimes screening committees serve a purpose, sometimes they don't to their intent, I should say. So again, I believe if the superintendent did his homework correctly, looked around and found out these are very hard positions to fill. We know, we did a superintendent search, it's very hard. We might have had 24 people, we only had 2 final candidates for the job, after the screening committee did through them. So it's not like there's a bunch of superintendents sitting in a room of business managers that are just waiting for a job. That's not the reality of today. They're very hard to find, especially ones that are fully competent. So again, I'm just going with the superintendent's recommendation.
Yeah, I just, very quickly, Mr. Tyler talked about the screening committees and the work that we did last year on the superintendent search. Positions either open or are created under an infinite number of circumstances. And I think that it's the hiring authority's responsibility, in this case a shared authority, to respond accordingly based on the circumstances. Sometimes you have a significant amount of time and you have no clue who you would like to fill that position. Other times it's the exact opposite. And I think what the responsible thing to do is to respond according to those circumstances. I understand that some people would prefer the position to be posted, but as I think it was Mr. Storrs who was saying that if we were to post a position for which the superintendent, with a sound, rational basis, had already determined his preferred candidate, we would then be being disingenuous. And I don't think I want to trade transparency for being genuine. I think we owe that level of authenticity. In this instance, the confidentiality, I would say it went on longer than I would prefer, except that it was a pretty short window of time. I mean, this is, we've already sort of addressed that, and I think that's sort of what we've tried to do here. Mr. Storrs, I think, was next, then Mrs. Sawyer.
Yeah, my concern about the time that I raised, it's not about the reorganization. I mean, believe me, I see the need to have another body in there helping with all these issues. I've seen it when I served before, and I've seen it now. I could see value in that. So that's not the concern. The concern is with some of the other things I brought up. The fact that at least the majority of these committee members, including myself, we don't fully understand how exactly this is cost neutral. I know it's been explained, but I also know that for specific reasons, we can't be told.
Just to clarify that, it's cost neutral to regard, it's not adding anything to the budget.
Oh, that's what I just said.
I thought you said you didn't understand how it's cost neutral.
No, what I said is we don't know the specifics on how it is cost neutral. You've given us generalities, but we have, for what position's going away, if any. What's the salary of that position? What's the roles and responsibilities of that position? Are those roles and responsibilities being shifted into the new business manager position? Why is the middle management position being called business manager and the new position being the higher one instead of, there's all those things that are questions that, we might not even be able to discuss before a vote is taken, and that is my concern. If this had been vetted through normal process, and I know the candidate couldn't because of timing, but at least the concept could have, these questions wouldn't be on my mind right now.
That's a fair point. I would just say it's a confluence of events it's a multi-dimensional issue there. But I'm sorry, Ms. Sawyer.
Well, I have no issues with any of this, like the policies subcommittee and Mr. Sheehan's implementation of the plan. I just didn't like the timing of it being given to us, and I just drew a blank. But anyways, I had no issues with it at all. I mean, and the fact that the policy that's in the binder wasn't exactly followed, but that was it. I mean, which we voted for tonight, and then other than that, I'm fine with it. you know, so.
No, I appreciate that, and again, I'll go back to the holiday weekend thing. It's not my preference either. There are
Yeah.
many things I would rather be doing on Memorial Day weekend, but, Mr. Chin?
I just, and I agree with everything that you've said. And under normal circumstances, I absolutely would have given the committee more time and done this in a very different way. But just for you to have a little bit, a greater understanding, in fact, between Mr. Murphy and myself and some other people, the bottom line was that interviews being conducted, new contracts being written, new job descriptions being written, all reviewed by school committee council prior to being presented to you tonight, face-to-face time on numerous occasions with both candidates. All of those things ordinarily would take months, and those were squeezed into less than a week plus. The essence of trying to get the right people into the right job in this circumstance made us play out of the box a little bit. But I knew that it was important for the district to get, I think, the appropriate team together that's going to move us forward, and that we don't have to spend some of the time that we spent together this year in very distasteful arenas that won't replicate themselves in the future.
We'll still
So-
spend time together.
I would, what?
We're still gonna spend time together, just
We are, but
focusing
maybe on teaching and learning.
There you go,
That's
exactly.
it.
Mr. Larson, then Mr. Withers.
I think, anyone who has been watching us for the last few weeks, or excuse me, the last few months, I mean, my frustration trying to move the district forward when we spend 3 hours having a finance subcommittee meeting just to go through the day-to-day operations,
Right?
and then to come to the rest of you with 12 motions on back-to-back months, with 24 motions not bringing anything really forward. I mean, we're keeping the status quo going, but there's nothing new on top of that. And so I'm very excited about having the split subcommittee, one that is doing, the day-to-day, and one that's moving the district forward, as it were. And
Sounds like another
Mr. President, I
volunteer.
think so.
Another volunteer.
I'll do both.
We're
I will
filling up the spots quickly.
happily do both.
Mr. Chair, can we vote on that one?
Um,
It sounds to me like
We will
everybody's
get there,
for
but
it,
I
so
want,
I'd rather get it
I
off
want
the
Mr.
list.
Larson to
You know,
finish his points.
So I think there's also times, and I've had it in my personal business, where there are people who, for whatever reason, all of a sudden become available. And yes, there's a process that you love to go through in normal course of business. And there are times where you are presented opportunities that, quite honestly, you don't even have a week and a half to make the decision. You've got a couple days.
That's what we had.
And these people don't always show up again for long periods of time. And I think this is an opportunity that we can really take advantage of. I see Attleboro being a huge beneficiary of bringing Mr. Furtado on board. Watching him in the past, I often thought and looked at the things that he would bring forward to the committee as easily saving the value of his salary plus every year to the district. The beauty of that is what he saved the year before, you get to save again the following year.
Right.
So the first year, you get the first savings. The second year, you get the first savings and the new savings. And it just continues to compound on each other. And all of a sudden, you get out of some of these little problems that we have financially because you've had someone who is not so tied up in the weeds of the day-to-day operation that can go out and start looking at some of the other things. What else could we do better that could save us money today, tomorrow, and going forward? And also having somebody taking care to make sure that you're not losing any of the things that you need to continue to do day to day. I mean, this is an incredible opportunity, and I certainly hope we take advantage of it.
Thank you. Mr. Withers?
I don't have anything further to add. He said what I was going to say, but
Good job.
he said it better than I would have, so.
No, fair enough. Are there other questions or comments? Okay, at Mr. Store's suggestion, I'll start with the motion to amend school committee policy
EDE.
BDE, as included in the packets, to establish a fourth standing subcommittee of the school committee to be called the Infrastructure and Facilities Planning Subcommittee, as well as an amendment to the name of the Finance, Facility, and Procurement Subcommittee to the Finance and Budget Subcommittee.
Second.
Discussion. Okay. We'll do a roll call vote on these. Ms. Singer.
Yes.
Mr. Tyler.
Yes.
Mr. Larson.
Yes.
Mr. Murphy, yes. Mrs. Scales.
Yes.
Mrs. Sawyer.
Yes.
Mr. Withers.
Yes.
Mr. Storrs.
Yes.
Motion passes 8-0. And again, like the other parts of this proposal, this would be effective July 1st, and so I'll be inquiring as to committee members as to interest in serving on the new standing subcommittee. There will be, also I should say that the policy subcommittee will be charged with reviewing the policy book to determine whether any other amendments need to be added in terms of responsibilities that are delegated to particular subcommittees. Maybe some other work as well, but that's certainly one of the aspects. Okay. Rewinding to, we have two motions with regard to the position of business manager. One is the approval of the revised job description, which contemplates the reduced portfolio, but also the added responsibility of serving in the role of helping to build the partnerships with external entities in the way that the superintendent outlined earlier. And
So moved.
so this is a motion to approve the job description. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, this is the job description of the business manager. Any further discussion? Mr. Storrs?
Yeah, I do want to say, ultimately, I see the position, I'm good with the position. I think it's the title that concerns me just a little bit. To me, the new position is the middle manager position, which is the one that's going to be, as we're looking at, responsible for the transportation of the facilities and all those. That's the new position. The current position, business manager, to me, it's not really changing. That's the position, and I know this is a very minor thing, but the way I look at it is the business manager position is staying the same, and this is the new position. And I guess the way we're looking at it is, this position is changing, and a new title will be given to the old position. It's just very odd to me.
Well, I mean, there's some truth to what you're saying, because the CFO responsibilities are being elevated to the position of director. And as most hierarchies, the manager reports to the director. Sometimes there can be a middle part, but that's generally the normal way. But in terms of the division of responsibilities, I do think that there's a clear distinction here where the business manager, while supporting the finance director in whatever the finance director or the superintendent, wherever they need support, also has responsibility for serving as the primary liaison to the major vendors. That we view as largely part of the day-to-day responsibilities, and frankly, the person filling the role currently and in the future, we think has a skill set that we want to take advantage of with regard to managing those relationships. So that's part of what's contemplated. But I mean, I understand the point, and there's some truth that the CFO responsibilities are being taken out and elevated to the director.
So related, the question I have is, per law, it is the business manager position that the superintendent brings to the school committee and the school committee needs to approve. Is this now going to be that both of these positions would fall under that criteria?
That is a legitimate question that I think the policy subcommittee should look at, but I think in this instance, the superintendent can ask us to approve any position he wants, and in this instance, because we're setting a protocol here for the first time with the new position, I think the superintendent was wise.
Quite honestly, I'm looking for the school committee's approval with the employment agreement amendment to Mr. Rose's business manager's position.
Yeah,
With the
but
looking
I think
forward.
Mr. Storrs is asking, by precedent and by law, the way our protocol has worked is that the superintendent by law, it says recommendation. It is tantamount to a nomination. And the superintendent makes a nomination and subject to the school committee approval. With the business manager being the senior business administrator, that vote was always subject to school committee approval.
Right.
In this instance, the director certainly would be subject to school committee approval. And I think that it's something for the policy subcommittee to work on whether or not we want to strengthen that or revise that policy in a way that specifically enumerates both positions as being subject to school committee approval. Because we're being asked, it's not so much an issue right now, but I think it is a discussion for the policy subcommittee to look at.
From my own point of view, as long as we are specifying specifically that the Director of Finance Controller will maintain that.
Absolutely.
Then I feel comfortable
Yep.
going forward.
But again, I don't think it's a, look, it's a shared governance system. Sometimes that frustrates any superintendent, sometimes that frustrates any school committee. That's the way that's the odd fellows, world we live in. But I think that it's definitely warrants consideration that position, business manager, being as high up as it is, the compensation being what it is, that still be subject to school committee approval. But I think it's a question for another day. Any other questions or comments with regard to the business manager job description? Okay, I'll take a roll call vote. Mr. Storrs?
Yes.
Mr. Withers?
Yes.
Mrs. Sawyer?
Yes.
Mrs. Scales?
Yes.
Mr. Murphy, yes. Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Tyler?
Yes.
Ms. Singer?
Yes.
Motion passes 8-0. The new job description for the business manager has been approved. Our next question is with regard to the contract amendment between the school district and Mr. Rose. So a motion to approve that contract amendment.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? I would just say that, while it's a reduction of responsibility, Mr. Rose has, I would say, enthusiastically embraced the idea of some of these new tasks that the committee is asking of him, and I look forward to working with him in those endeavors. Any further discussion? I'll do another roll call vote. Ms. Singer?
Yes.
Mr. Tyler?
Yes.
Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Murphy, yes. Mrs. Scales?
Yes.
Mrs. Sawyer?
Yes.
Mr. Withers?
Yes.
Mr. Storrs?
Yes.
Motion passes 8-0, the approval of Mr. Rose's contract amendment. Okay, our next vote is on the establishment of the position of Director of Finance and Controller to serve as the CFO of the district. So a motion to establish the position of Director of Finance and Controller as described in the job description provided to the school committee, and this vote will encompass the job description itself.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion. Mr. Storrs?
One of the things I noticed is the qualifications, compared to two positions. There's actually more qualifications required for the business manager position than there is for the Director of Finance and Controller. It's what most would consider minor things such as 3 to 5 year supervisory experience, strong supervisory skills, ability to work with high-performing teams. Those are very often the standard things, and I was just surprised not to see it in the qualifications for the higher level position while they maintained in the business manager position. If you see what I'm looking at.
I thought, I understand what you're saying, but I actually thought that the qualifications were higher for the director. But Mr. Sheehan, do you have any comment on that, or? I mean,
I
frankly,
just knew
except
that the person, in fact, already met all of those qualifications, and
Yeah.
it didn't need to be placed in writing.
But it may be something to look at down the road, though. I mean,
It's something that I will put a mental note with regard to when we have template contracts.
Yep.
I'll make sure it goes into the template contract in the future.
Yep.
I mean, the main thing is this isn't about the person. This is about the position.
Yes.
And, I don't see why we wouldn't want to include those kind of things in what we're about to approve.
Yeah, I think that there's, that warrants consideration, and perhaps something, like I said, the policy subcommittee is going to have some work as a result of this, presuming it passes, with regard to going through the policy book and making those types of adjustments. And I don't think there's anything wrong with subsequent to tonight, that, some tinkering being done with regard to that.
And ultimately, the responsibilities are more encompassing. It was just a
Yeah.
qualification section. That
Yeah, I mean, it's a
kind
small
of-
section, but I agree. We should reflect the position in the hierarchy, so.
I think that's the way, yeah.
Any further discussion? So the vote is on the establishment of the position of Director of Finance and Controller and the job description included thereof. And we'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Storrs?
Yes.
Mr. Withers?
Yes.
Mrs. Sawyer?
Yes.
Mrs. Scales?
Yes.
Mr. Murphy, yes. Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Tyler?
Yes.
Ms. Singer?
Yes.
The motion passes. The job description and the establishment of the position. And the next is, I will turn over to Mr. Sheehan to make the formal recommendation to the school committee to appoint Mr. Furtado with the contract that's included in the school committee's
Members of
package.
the committee, as you have received in your packets, the information associated with my recommendation. At this time, I do recommend the committee to employ Mark Furtado as the Director of Finance and Control for the Attleboro Public Schools.
So I'll make a motion to appoint Mr. Furtado as the Director of Finance and Control of the Attleboro Schools.
Second.
Any further discussion? Mr. Tyler?
I just want to say, I had the honor of working with Mr. Furtado before in 2008, 2009, when I chaired the finance. Mark is a wealth of information, and I can honestly say that I came out of it a lot better school committee member because of a lot of meetings with Mark. And he's not afraid to tell you, sometimes you ask that question and they always say, you're not going to like the answer, but here it is, because of a law or a stipulation. And then he makes you realize that when you open one door, there's actually an education, there's another 7 or 8 doors behind it. And he took the time to explain that. And it was very tough because we had 3 new members at the time on the finance subcommittee. So we had a lot of questions. And I think as Bill said, him watching meetings of it earlier, Mark had a good way of explaining things out. A lot of patience on issues. And I think just as Bill was saying, we did have those marathon finance committee meetings too, especially around budget time. And I promise I won't go to your finance meeting next time. I'll hold it up even longer. But again, I couldn't be happy to bring Mark back into the position. I think he's going to be a truly great asset for Attleboro, as he was in the past.
Thank you, Mr. Tyler. Mr. Larson?
Just echoing Mr. Tyler's comments, I'm very appreciative that this is coming forward to us, so I thank you for that. I look forward to working with Mr. Furtado in the future, and I'm very excited about the opportunity.
Mr. Storrs?
I've worked with Mr. Furtado when I served as well, and I do have to say that there's some things that he did very well, and I have always been complimentary of those things. He did find us significant cost savings at different times. I think my concern was around the time when he was making the decision to leave, and I feel I need to express this because this does lead to concerns on my part. The committee at the time, we went through a lot to try to maintain him. And it was not a very popular discussion, if you will. And ultimately, we approved what I would consider a significant pay increase to maintain him. And ultimately, he decided to leave on his own, and for his own reasons. Mm-hmm. But I think when that happened, that really, it just caused concern for me, that after everything that we had gone through to maintain him, that he chose to leave on his own. Couple that with some of the things I've read in the media that I'm not going to go into major detail on, but the fact that we don't have enough time to vet those concerns that are in the media. Mm-hmm. It's enough of a concern for me that although I really hope that this is going to be, the best thing for the district, I would prefer a more encompassing process. So that's why this is very difficult for me, this appointment.
Mr. Withers?
I wasn't on the school committee when Mr. Furtado, when he left. I think, a lot of the community knows, nuggets of what happened around them. But one thing I will say is that I think a lot of us that, have run more recently ran because we didn't like the way, things were being run in the image that was being portrayed on television every 2 weeks. And I think, that has to be taken into account that, he had his reasons for leaving, but, there were reasons that I'm sure would have caused a lot of people to leave probably sooner than he did. So just to kind of counter that a little bit, the fact that he's willing to come back, I think, is a great benefit to us, something that's kind of fallen in our lap.
Ms. Singer?
And while I appreciate, what Mr. Storr said about being able to vet a candidate, until our superintendent shows me otherwise, I have no reason to not trust his thorough, investigation of this individual and qualifications of this individual, and so I think we need to support that.
Ms. Scouse?
I have to agree with Julie. I don't want just another body. I just want, and I truly trust that he's done the process that's needed for the position.
Thank you. Mr. Storrs?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if I was new to the committee, having never served, I'd be thinking the same way. You know, trust solely, but, you know, the way I do things is I really want to do my due diligence. And to me, that would be contacting members at that candidate's district and taking the time to actually find out whether the things I'm reading are accurate or not accurate. I truly hope they're not accurate, and most likely they're not. But based on the time that we're being given, I have to put some substance into what I'm reading about the issues at this candidate's district, and that's problematic. In addition, the way the contract is written up here, it has automatic pay increases over the 3-year contract, and that was concerning to me as well. I mean, 5% pay increases in this budget times with the unknown of the future, that added to my concern.
I think that's a fair point. I just make a couple of just quick responses. I mean, you know, Mr. Furtado has a long-term contract available to him in the district that he's currently serving in. That is what has precipitated the urgency of this issue. And so whatever other issues may have been reported by the media, and having, you know, I'll talk a little bit about that in a second, but, you know, at the end of the day, they're, as we speak, trying to get him to stay. Literally, as we speak, trying to get him to stay. And the second thing I would say with regard to the pay, this is a 3-year contract. The third year of the contract is, I believe, less than Mr. Furtado was offered to stay in 2011, when those efforts that you referred to were made by the committee to try to keep him. It is less money than he's being paid now. It's less money than he's being offered to stay. And I suspect if this motion is approved, that Mr. Furtado will be joining us in the near future, and he'll probably want to articulate this himself. But I will say that in the brief conversations that I've had with him over the last week, he made very clear that leaving Attleboro was the biggest mistake he ever made professionally. He said that, you know, this is the district that he wants to be a part of, that he's committed to. Yeah, he regrets it, that it was his departure was a consequence of the environment at the time. And, you know, for that reason, we're getting him at a little bit of a hometown discount. And I think that is a part, as Mr. Withers said, certainly fell into our lap. And I think the bigger part of that is that, you know, the superintendent has articulated, I think, well, that we're not reaching out to Mark Furtado to solve all of our problems. We're identifying legitimate issues that we have and things that aren't going as well as our students and families deserve. And we see, I agree with the superintendent. I see Mr. Furtado as a part of moving forward with a newly constructed team that will help address those issues and restore our focus on teaching and learning. And that's, you know, that's sort of my view on it, and I would just urge my colleagues to support the superintendent's recommendation. Are there any other questions or comments? Mrs. Sawyer.
Mr. Chairman, respectfully, I mean, our own policy states that in GCF that when we create a new position that we do a screening process, and we haven't even done that.
Well, I mean,
It's like, how do we know that someone within our own district is not interested in moving up within the chain?
well, I mean, the first point, I didn't mean to cut you off. May I
No,
respond?
no, it's fine, I was just clearing.
Sure.
I have an answer for that.
And I just, in one moment, Mr. Sheehan, I mean, one, I don't know that we have anyone else licensed to take the position in the district. Is that,
That's the one.
that's what happens when we spend that much time together, you know? That would be one point. I think the second point is that the policy contemplates that a screening committee may be put together, but it doesn't require it. It's also suspended for purposes of this discussion, but beyond that, the policy, the reason that flexibility is there is because it contemplates the fact that all different circumstances can play out, and that it's incumbent upon the committee to respond accordingly based on those circumstances. I'm not opposed to screening committees. I'm not opposed to inclusiveness in searches. a year ago, as I think Mr. Tyler can attest, I facilitated 38 focus groups and trying to include as many stakeholders as possible in the superintendent search process. I believe wholeheartedly in inclusiveness and transparency. I don't see this as lacking either of those in a way that's unwarranted. I see it as extenuating circumstances and an opportunity for this committee to do something that will have a positive impact on the district. Others may feel it's not that, and I certainly respect that. But that's why I'm supporting the superintendent's recommendation.
No, if you don't advertise, you don't know who may be interested, who might apply.
Mhm.
You know, we're not even making an attempt.
And what I would say to that is when that is the process that plays out, which it normally does, and it has for the other positions that have been added since Mr. Sheehan began, you have the opportunity to interview a candidate. And sometimes the person interviews well, and that is reflective of the potential to have a positive impact. And sometimes the person interviews well, and that's reflective of individual's ability to interview well. And I don't think you could. I would never say an interview would be a more effective means to assess someone's capability to contribute to a district as serving for a number of years.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Withers, I see your hand.
Yeah, and I think you touched on it, Mr. Chairman. I was going to say that the policy that we enacted tonight to suspend policies or suspend procedures, whatever the actual term is, I mean, that's put into place for situations like this, unique circumstances call for unique procedures, a unique way to proceed, to be able to adapt to any fact pattern that presents itself. And if we're going to tie ourselves to a policy binder and act in that way, no matter what the situation is, we're going to miss out on some opportunities. Does that mean that there might not be someone else out there that could possibly apply for this job? Sure, there could be, but we have someone who's presented themselves to us that we know that has done a good job for us in the past, and we have a way to proceed tonight. So I think that we have to be able and willing to react and to react quickly when the situation calls for it.
Sure. Mr. Tyler?
Yeah, I don't want to drag it out too much, but I just want to hook upon a little bit what the chair was saying through Mr. Sawyer's concern about screening committees. I think we all need to realize that a screening committee is it's set up between the chairman or chairperson, of the Attleboro School Committee and the superintendent of the schools. They pick certain people to put on the screening committee. But when it is a position that, all positions are under the superintendent, we don't really have any. We work off a recommendation from him. So again, it doesn't matter if we have a screening committee, went through the whole process. In the end, the superintendent's going to bring a recommendation. The screening committee can make a recommendation all they want. The superintendent does not have to go with the screening committee's recommendation. You would hope they take all those factors into it, but he or she's under no obligation to do so whatsoever. It's their job as the top educators in the system to put forward the best candidate. So I agree, screening committees are very important, and believe me, we had enough of them over the last couple of years. But again, I think you just need to know the makeup of it. It's, that's between the chairperson and the superintendent, and ultimately, the superintendent has a say, just like he's brought that say and recommendation to us tonight, so.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that, Mr. Tyler, is that the policy itself doesn't require a screening committee. That it's an option, and it would be whether it was in the policy or not. In this case, the policy is suspended, but that was frankly why I had a little bit of a reservation about suspending the policy, because I can't really put my finger on exactly what policy is required to be suspended. That being said, the suspension of the policy doesn't require a specific policy, and so it contemplates a situation where you're just trying to sort of use an abundance of caution. Ms. Singer?
I actually was going to say I just wanted to clarify that an interview process wouldn't include us anyway. It's the superintendent, who I believe did do his due diligence in putting forward this individual. So the result wouldn't have been any different according to what Mr. Sheehan had
correct.
said before. So I just wanted to clarify that we wouldn't actually be interviewing anyway, or being a part of the search committee, like Mike said.
Not
that would be-
necessarily, certainly.
right.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. So.
But I mean, I think we're touching upon various points here, and they all have a lot of validity. the reservations that have been expressed are about the importance of having a thorough and inclusive process. And there's no question about that. And the sentiment of urgency that's being expressed is a consequence of our need, I would say, and it's sort of reflective of Mr. Withers' comments, to be rigid when we should be rigid and flexible when we should be flexible. And in this instance, there are a number of unique circumstances, factors, and variables, all of which have sort of added up to this urgent situation. And what I see, and I think others see, certainly the superintendent sees, as an opportunity to do something that will have a positive impact on the district. Someone could think that it's not an opportunity to do that. That would be fair. Someone could say that it's an opportunity, but it's outweighed by some of the concerns that have been expressed. I think that's perfectly fair as well. I think that, and I appreciate very much the thoughtfulness and thoroughness that the committee members have brought to the discussion tonight. I don't think Mr. Sheen and I, when we were putting our packet together, we were thinking everybody's going to love this. Wow, won't we be, especially coming on a holiday weekend, we will be, people will be sitting around the barbecue saying wonderful things about us. But we were also, frankly, faced last week with a situation in which we needed to decide, are we going to, do what we think is in the best interest of the district? And I think that's where we came out. And I think, frankly, that's where everyone here tonight has come out, regardless of where everyone's come down on the issue. So I'm going to call for a roll call vote on the appointment of Mr. Furtado as the Director of Finance and Controller. Ms. Singer?
Yes.
Mr. Tyler?
Yes.
Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Murphy, yes. Mrs. Scales?
Yes.
Mrs. Sawyer?
No.
Mr. Withers?
Yes.
Mr. Storrs?
No.
The motion passes 6-2. We'll adjourn momentarily. Mr. Sheen, if you could contact Mr. Furtado and let him know the results of the committee's vote.
Thank you.
I'll just say in closing, and we're going to adjourn to what I anticipate will be a very, very brief executive session, that, again, this is a difficult choice. It's a complex matter. The amount, the fact that the committee has responded to all the aspects of it with the type of positive and constructive approach that we have, even when there's been some disagreement, I greatly appreciate. I appreciate all the comments. I don't think any of them, as I said, lacked validity. And I think that, the committee has now made a decision in conjunction with our superintendent. I think we've demonstrated what a strong and constructive relationship between a school committee and administration can look like. And I think that over time, we'll demonstrate the value that can add to a school district and the benefits that it can yield for the students, which is why we're here. I don't expect everyone to agree with the decision, but I look forward in the weeks, months, and hopefully years ahead, working with this leadership team to try to move the school district forward. So thank you very much. I'm going to entertain a motion to enter into executive session for purposes of discussing collective bargaining negotiations. The executive session is being called because I feel as though the public discussion would potentially have a detrimental impact on the district's bargaining position.
So moved.
Not be reconvening?
And we will not be, thank you, Mr. Storrs, we will not be reconvening in open session.
Second.
Ms. Singer?
Yes.
Mr. Tyler?
Yes.
Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Murphy, yes. Mrs. Scales?
Yes.
Mrs. Sawyer?
Yes.
Mr. Withers?
Yes.
Mrs. Storrs?
Yes.
And the committee will take a 5-minute recess while we move to executive session.
What I need is a.
Just kidding.